Thanks, Chair. I thought you'd forgot about me.
I didn't see you up me, sorry.
First of all, to the witnesses, thanks for coming in, or thanks for participating. Could you just elaborate there on the prescriber benchmarking, what you mean by that, first of all? Second of all, would you have a concern that if there is a different regime being used north of the border, which for many farmers is only basically walk across an invisible line, have you a concern that we should be, in line with each other, north and south, for best outcomes for basically for our farmers and for the whole industry? And in Denmark and the Netherlands, I note in your submission, do you think there's a danger that, and you talked there about, say, veterinary practitioners, the smaller, you have to look at the smaller farmer as again the bigger farmer. And do you think there's a danger there where it will cost, and I suppose you're not bothered about cost as such, that it may cost a smaller farmer an awful lot more, because obviously the bigger guys will be getting more stuff? And would you recommend that if this was going down the road that it looks to be going at the moment, that we were better have a separation, as Deputy Carty pointed out, nearly like the doctor and the chemist, that you could get the prescription in one place and you could get the medicine in the other, for the simple reason it's very hard, and I'd like your thoughts on this. It's very hard for a farmer to walk into a veterinary practitioner and say, I could do with the prescription, and then walk down the road and be getting it at the local co-op, for the sake of argument. And I'm just wondering, what's your thoughts on that, for the benefit of the whole industry? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Fitzmaurice. Through the chair, I might pass the second, third and fourth question to my colleague, Catherine McAloon, but I'd like to tackle the first one, if I could, in terms of prescriber benchmarking. So what has happened both in Denmark and also in the Netherlands, but particularly in the Netherlands, has been that firstly they set up a system to capture prescribing data. And that is used firstly to understand how much antibiotic is used, but then to actually benchmark. So what that means is to understand at the level of nationally, then at the level of the sector, then at the level of the prescriber, and finally at the level of the farm. So if I just focus on the prescriber. So what they do is they capture prescribing data, they capture it electronically, and then for each prescriber in the country, after taking account of the type of farms they prescribe to, after taking account of the species, for example, pigs versus cattle, they're then able to determine who are the heaviest, for example, the heaviest 10%, the prescribers that prescribe the heaviest 10% of product. And they're the people that they then spend some time essentially talking through the prescribing practices, trying to see why it is that they're such heavy prescribers. And these prescribing targets, which are farm level targets and also are prescriber level targets, have actually proved critical. One of the critical factors, if we take the Dutch, for example, they set a target of reducing the amount of antimicrobial used in food production by 20% in 2009. By the time they got to 2011, they dropped it down to 50% of 2009 targets. And by the time they got a little bit further, they said they could reduce the total amount of antibiotics used in the country by 70%. And they've continued to drive down antibiotic use, but without any effect in terms of safety for animals. And that's really important, because if we think of the farm to fork strategy of the European Commission, they're seeking for 50% reduction in antimicrobial usage in farm animal production by 2030. And the Dutch, the Danes, the French, the Germans, a number of countries are dramatically reducing antimicrobial usage, and that hasn't happened here as yet. So this is really a critical factor for success in us being able to do this. And just before I pass to my colleague Catherine, in terms of the other three questions, I just highlight why this is so important. The reason it's important is that at the moment, to give you an example, there's antibiotics being used at the moment in the dairy production sector in Ireland that actually are one of the few alternatives left for the treatment of severe sepsis and respiratory tract infection in people. One of the few products left on the market. So this issue of seeking to drive down antimicrobial usage in the food sector is really important, both in legislation but also from a moral sense too. So through the chair, if I could please pass to my colleague Catherine McAloon to answer the other questions Deputy Fitzmaurice asked. Thank you.
No problem. Dr. McAloon.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. If I could first just add a few points to the original question from Deputy Carthy, in addition to Simon's points. In terms of can we do it quickly, I think that certainly if we have an agreed motivation within the sector and across all levels of industry, then an agreed motive, then if we have a collaborative approach, then a lot can be achieved. In terms of the regulation and the change that will be required to the status quo in terms of prescribing for antimicrobials related to mastitis, then certainly there are things that we need to do, some more urgently than others, but there is a gulf certainly between the legislation and the mindset, both among vets and farmers currently, and there's understandably a fear as we move away from blanket dry cow therapy. So ultimately, there is a major need to address the communication piece and to frame this regulation as positively as we can, because the narrative around the opportunities to improve our prudence in terms of antimicrobial usage, but also in terms of addressing milk quality in order to reduce the need for antimicrobials in the first place, provides us with a real opportunity to keep pace with our competitors. Within discussions in CellCheck, we have looked at, will those things, are those things achievable? Things like communication strategy, which could be coordinated nationally in terms of upskilling vets and farmers. The TASA dry cow consults that have been implemented from CellCheck have been very successful, as reported by both vets and farmers alike. And so the framework for some of that is already in place. And also we're told that in terms of increase the need for milk recording, that infrastructure could be put in place quite quickly. So I think certainly there is positive opportunity there if the collaborative effort is agreed and the motivations are brought in line. To move on now to the questions from Deputy Fitzmaurice, and thank you again for the questions. I guess to elaborate on the point on bringing us into line with Northern Ireland, I think there's a couple of points. I guess our industry is quite different in terms of a manufacturing-based milk supply contracts and milk going into infant formula and niche markets that would be quite different from sales north of the border. So I think with that in mind, trying to protect and promote the markets that we have in terms of infant formula, then there is a real need to move with best practice in terms of antimicrobial usage and prescribing. And I suppose ultimately the second point would be that mastitis is quite farm specific, and the epidemiology of problems of mastitis are quite unique and specific to the farm, which means that we are needing for bespoke solutions to those farms. So I think it is certainly possible to operate best practice, and I think that's what we should strive to do in terms of prudent antimicrobial use within the dairy sector here, and we need to push on and achieve that. In regard to the second or the third question rather, in terms of the cost, and I think that's a very valid and very valid concern among farmers. And I guess overall the point of this regulation is to, one, reduce antimicrobial usage, but also to move towards more prudent use. And regardless of who sells the antimicrobial, in terms of the national goal is to reduce usage overall. through a coordinated effort to reduce, to improve milk quality and reduce the need for antimicrobials. So in terms of mastitis, it's a very costly disease. Teagasc have reported that there is a difference of €20,000 in farm profit between a bulk tank cell count of 100,000 compared to a bulk tank cell count of 400,000. There are significant costs associated with individual mastitis cases, and I think overall the cost benefit, if it is done properly and safely, reducing mastitis on farm and reducing the need for antimicrobials will be a cost benefit in the long run. And finally, and I think Dr. Finola may be able to add some further points on this, but the idea of where we can purchase drugs, I suppose, is not necessarily something that we can comment on in terms of scientific best practice. The Danes and the Dutch, who are both very successful in their quest to reduce antimicrobial usage in their dairy sectors, are operating different models. And from the scientific point of view, certainly our focus would be on bringing prescribing into line with best practice and focusing on the prescribing.
So
thank you for your time.
Just one short add-on. So if a person was suitably qualified and trained, you could achieve the same results. Like when you talk about the two different countries, what you're saying is the person, so long as the person has the proper training on it, and the farmers work with them, that it's achievable. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that our current prescribing practices are out of line with international norms and out of line with international best practice. So in terms of our focus, particularly within the document supplied, is really on the overhaul of prescribing practices as opposed to sales, because prudent prescribing and the need to change and address our current status quo in terms of prescribing for intermammary will be necessary to bring us into line with best practice.